Okay, good morning. Let's make a start. We have a short time just to share a few thoughts and ideas, which hopefully will be meaningful, particularly at this at this time. The truth is that if you look at the end of the parsha we learned yesterday, the end of Parsha Shmos, the parsha ends on a cliffhanger of Emunah, a crisis of Emunah. And I think that really demonstrates for us just how much Emunah goes to the heart of who we are as a people. You know, the Moshe Rabbeinu famously goes to Paro and says to him, at time you have to let the Jewish people go free. And of course he says he refuses, and then he makes things even harder for them. And it's at that moment that Moshe turns around to Hashem and says, Loma hare osol am hazeh. He says, why have you done this to this people? Loma zeh shlachtoni. Why have you sent me? What is the purpose of you doing this? I thought at least I would improve things, and now things have got even worse than they were before. Essentially, what's reflected in the words of Moshe Rabbeinu here is the sense that the real challenges often to Emunah can come from a situation where a person thinks it's going in a certain direction, and then there are bumps in the road. Sometimes it even looks harder than it did at the outset. That's the situation that Moshe Rabbeinu faces. Loma hare osol am hazeh. Why have you made it even worse? Why is it that the situation that we're now in appears even more precarious than it was before? But the response is, of course, at the beginning of next week's parsha, primarily, where Hashem says, "Vo'era el Avraham el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov bekel shakai, v'shmi Hashem lo nedati lohem." I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with the name Kel Shakai, but my name Hashem, the name of Hashem, lo nedati lohem. They never knew me by my name Hashem. What is the difference between the notion, the difference between the name of Hashem and the name of Kel Shakai? The name of Hashem represents the essence of Hashem. It's coming closer, understanding, having that deep sense of understanding of the essence of Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu is told by Hashem that if you want to learn how to survive, how to thrive, even in situations where Emunah itself is threatened, where you have those questions that seem to say, why should it be worse now than we thought it was? Then the answer is to take hold of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to take hold of the lessons that we learned from our ancestors. There are many different pathways to Emunah, but there is no question that one of the most important ways, if not the most important, is looking to our own history as a people and looking to the way the greatest figures, the greatest individuals in our past learnt and gave us guidance, directed us on how the notion of Emunah can effectively change our lives and can inspire us to live each day to a better in a better manner than before. There is a famous book by Yafa Eliach called The Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. And basically what happened was in 1968, she sent a group of her students, she was teaching at Brooklyn College, and she sent a group of her students to Hasidic families in order to basically gather stories. Many of these people were survivors. This was 1968. Many of them were survivors. And she wanted to gather stories from the Holocaust that had not been told before. And many of them had never before appeared in print. If you haven't seen that book, it's now a classic, Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. It's absolutely worthwhile trying to get a copy of. But the beginning of that book, the very, very first story, tells the following incident, which became, I think, known as one of the most famous episodes in the whole book. She says it was a dark, cold night in the Yanovska road camp, and there was suddenly a shout in the air: "You're all to evacuate the barracks immediately. You have to report to the empty space, and anyone who remains inside will be shot on the spot." And one of the people taken out is the Bluzhever Rebbe, Rabbi Spira, and he's taken out with a young man called Baruch Singer. And the two of them are standing outside in the cold, in the freezing dark. And the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, say to them, you need to run and jump across a pit. And it seems impossible. The gap is simply too far. It's an impossible task. Somehow they're meant to do so, and only those who land safely on the other side will be saved from death. And at the end of the story, miraculously, they're able to make it. They make it over to the other side of the pit, against all the odds. They manage to jump across this enormous pit. And the young man turns around to the Rebbe and says to the Rebbe, how did you get across? And the Rebbe says, I was holding onto all of the zchusim, all of the merits of my ancestors, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. But the Rebbe turns around to the young man and he says, that's how I did it, but how did you do it? And the young man turns around to the Rebbe and says, I was holding on to you. And the reason why that story is so powerful is because really, when we reduce our sense of Emunah to its core, really what we often, I think, are left with is the sense that all we have to hold on to, really, is those merits of our ancestors. That's really the response, I think, that Hashem is giving to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's saying to him, you want to remain strong? Now is the moment when you have to look back to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Now is the time when we have to look back to the way our ancestors guided us through difficult times. The challenge, the time we're living in now, is in a sense even greater, because it's not exactly, I would say it doesn't follow the line that we would normally assume that we by default go through as Jews. You know, we are used to the notion of us being tragically threatened as a people, faced with persecution. This is something we have become very, very familiar with, sadly overly familiar with. But when we're called upon to if you like, delve deep into our reserves of Emunah, in a situation which faces the entire globe, and not specifically us as a people, in a way it presents a different challenge. It presents the necessity to look at things in a different way than we have before. And for that, I think we need to go back and we need to address the essence of Emunah itself, what exactly Emunah is meant to achieve, what it means to have faith. And I'd like to, we'll begin with it this week, and really the idea is, as I said, just a short piece to try and share some hopefully helpful thoughts and ideas. We'll begin this week looking at some ideas of Rav Wolbe, of Shlomo Wolbe in Alei Shur, who is a deep and profound thinker, really gives us tremendous insight into some of the key areas of what it means to be Jewish as a whole. So we'll begin with some ideas this week, which will continue in Mitzvah Hashem next week. Rav Wolbe says in the 16th parak of the first volume of his Sefer Alei Shur, his introduction to what Emunah is. He brings a Gemara in Shabbos, and the Gemara in Shabbos says that someone who answers Amen with their entire strength, the gates of Gan Eden are open for them. When it says Amen, the gates of Gan Eden are open. Shneimar, as the Pasuk says, Pischu Sha'arim, open the gates, v'yovoi goy tzadik, and a righteous nation will enter. Shomer emunim, those who guard the faith. Al tikre shomer emunim. So the Gemara says, don't read this as those who guard the faith. Ela she'omrim omein. It's a play on words, those who say omein. And what is omein? Says the Gemara, my omein. Omer Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says, Kel melech ne'emon. This is what omein is. Omein is Kel melech ne'emon. Three small words that we say if we say Shema in private as opposed to with a minyan. We begin with those words, Kel melech ne'emon, which we translate as God, faithful King. Says Rav Wolbe, one of the incredible things that Chazal do, and this is consistent across the whole of the Gemara, across the whole of Chazal, is to tell us things that are really at the pinnacle of spirituality, specifically with very, very small actions which seem tiny and insignificant. The idea of saying Amen with proper kavanah, with proper intent and understanding what one's saying, is a tiny, he says, Ma'aseh Koton shel Emunah. It's a small act of faith. That's all it is. It's a small thing just to say Amen. But Chazal teach us that through doing so, that small action of saying Amen, of Emunah, of faith, they're open in front of a person the gates of Gan Eden, the gates of Gan Eden. And he says that what does that phrase mean, the gates of Gan Eden are open? It's an unusual phrase. It's more common to find the idea, Muftach lo shu ben ha'olam haba. That's much more common. The idea that a person is assured of having a place in the world to come if they do X, Y, Z. Here, the phrase is different. Here, the phrase is, the gates of Gan Eden are open. What does that mean? He says Gan Eden was the place of Harishon, of course, before the Chet, before the first sin. Effectively, the idea represented by being outside or inside Gan Eden is that outside Gan Eden, there is the temptation, the inclination, the natural direction is to think that everything is subsumed by what we call teva, what we call nature. Everything is completely detached from Hashem. That's how unfortunately, that's the default position we take. When we look at history in the world outside Gan Eden, we look at history as a chain of events that are just happenstance, just happened to be. This happened, and therefore this happened to happen, and therefore this happened as a result. Everything seems to be happenstance. And what happens is, as a result of our existence outside Gan Eden, there is this wall that's constructed gradually between us and our recognition of Hashem. What Emunah does, says Rav Wolbe, is it reveals Hashem within that hidden environment. It removes, it destroys, it deconstructs that wall between us and Hashem. So when Chazal say, one who answers Amen with all their strength, the gates of Gan Eden become open to them, what that means is they take one little step to remove themselves. We remove ourselves from this notion of hest upon him, the world of concealment where we cannot see, we can't connect with Hashem. It's so difficult to feel and so difficult to understand that the world has a direction, that Hashem is the guiding force. And we begin to uncover that just ever so slightly, to take a step into the notion of Gan Eden itself, to be able to see that everything is ultimately guided by Hashem. Someone who has strength in their emunah in that sense is able to live a spiritual life even in this world. But always we remember that the way to achieve this is not through incredible acts of courage, of faith, of demonstrating or turning around one's whole life to live a life of total confidence in every situation. As we say, halavai, if only we could live like that. But that's not the way Chazal choose to teach us these lessons. They talk about doing one small thing. They talk about saying Amen with kavanah. Maybe an idea, a thought for the coming week. Once a day, let's try and say Amen when we think of, and one Amen a day when we think about the fact that Amen stands for Kel Melech Ne'emon, that Hashem is the God faithful King. The idea that saying Amen means we put our trust and faith in Hashem. When we do that, what we're really doing is we're connecting not only to this idea, the idea that practically bringing Emunah into our lives takes us one step further within the gates of Gan Eden, so that we're not living a life where everything's hidden and concealed and difficult to feel any connection. We're actually living lives that begin to allow us to recognize Hashem's presence in some way. But by doing so, by following the advice of Chazal, essentially what we're doing is we're connecting to the same idea, the same confidence that Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu himself. As we began with the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu's cry of pain at the end of Parsha we learned yesterday is Lo mahari olam hazeh. I thought things were going to get better, and they're getting even worse. Hashem's response is, look backwards. Look where you came from. Look to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because they will inspire you. They will help you remain strong. When we're looking for faith and confidence, when we're looking to strengthen our emunah, the greatest thing we can do is to look upwards. As the famous story is told of an archaeologist who spent years excavating caves in Spain, didn't find anything. And eventually one day he decided to bring along his little daughter. And she walks into the cave and she looks around and she points up to the ceiling and she says, "Daddy, what is that? What's going on?" And he looks up, and on the cave roof are incredible cave paintings that he never even noticed. That would turn out to make these caves, the Almira caves in Spain, some of the most famous caves, prehistoric caves that have ever been discovered. What was the difference between the young girl and the father? Very simple. She looked up. That's all. She looked upwards. If we look upwards, if we look up to our heritage, if we look up to where we came from, to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, we can then try and live and hopefully live lives that are inspired and have that extra bit of injection of emunah, of faith, to help us through the coming week. I wish you all a good week. Mitzvah Hashem, should have a happy, healthy week, and everything should go well. And we will reconvene in Mitzvah Hashem next week for more ideas along the same theme. Okay, have a good day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great pleasure. Thank you.